Have you ever felt that life keeps smacking you in the face constantly? It seems like life will never hold up and it will never cease. This life analogy was similar for farmers because the country was in the middle of the Great Depression and then farmers had to deal with the Dust Bowl. The Great Depression hurt farmers because their livelihood relied on selling crops year in and year out. During the economic boom of the 1920s, people had money to buy consumer goods like refrigerators, which could preserve food. When the Great Depression hit, though, people had to sell their consumer goods back, which lowered the demand for food because food could not be preserved as long and saved for later days. The lower demand for food meant that prices for food would reduce and farmers would be losing money, especially when they had bought their own consumer goods such as tractors to meet with the original demand for food. As a response to the lower prices, farmers tried to make even more food to sell on the market, not knowing that the increased supply of food will lower the price of food even further due to the increased supply and less demand. The graph shows that the price will go down. The Dust Bowl was an extra beatdown that had some farmers leave while others stayed, hoping for better times ahead. What is the Dust Bowl, though? The Dust Bowl was a series of dust storms that occurred due to a severe drought and an increase in dryland farming techniques, which increased soil erodibility. Farmers had used topsoil on their crops, which dried out with the drought. Since the crops were not growing due to the drought, the topsoil that farmers placed on their crops dried out and was easily blown away by the wind. This led to dust storms that stretched across the country for miles. New York journalist George Greenfield traveled by train through 200 miles of what he called a man-made fog. He blamed the farmers for the dust storms because he believed the land, and I quote, was raped by greed for $2 a wheat. This highly insensitive statement was in the New York Times in 1937 after two of the dust storms had hit earlier a few years ago. What was the actual price of wheat in 1937 for a bushel when Greenfield wrote his article? 96 cents a bushel. When did farmers last sell their wheat at $2 a bushel or more? 1920, 17 years ago, at $2.96 a bushel. Farmers had wasted the land due to greedy farmers, and their short-sightedness alone contributed to the Dust Bowl, according to Greenfield. So here we have farmers who have decided that they would spend their one life on this very earth planning enough food so that other people can pursue other career choices like Greenfield in his journalism career. And farmers have to read about how they are the cause of the dust storm due to their greed and when environmental factors, for which farmers have no control, also contributed to these dust storms. What did the dust do to the people? Greenfield noted that two trainmen had died of dust pneumonia, where the dust affected their lungs so badly that their lungs were not able to function properly. We must assume that the farmers and their families also lost considerable lung function due to the dust, just like the trainmen. So what though? Dust, hair, dead-skinned skulls surround us every day. Perhaps the magnitude of the storm would be best described by Leroy Hankel, a farmer who had lived during the storm. But the sky in the west, as far as you, just a black cloud. That's the way it looked. But it was all dirt, and that was all we got out of it. We got all dirt. Dave Frazier had his truck sitting out in front of the store there, and it even blew that about 30 to 40 feet, just right down the street. So here's the situation to quickly recap. An environmental coupled with dire economic needs, leads to multiple storms throughout the Midwest that eventually would have all that dust carry over to large industrial cities like Buffalo, Washington, and New York City. Understandably, some farmers had enough and decided that trying to grow food during the storms was pointless. Some farmers decided that they would move to California in an effort to find work. Farmers had good reasons to leave their home and try for a better life in California. In the hardest hit areas of the Dust Bowl, there was a population decrease of nearly 20% in the Dust Bowl counties. Remember, with only one life to live, farmers had to choose between leaving their farms behind or breathing in the dust while trying to make a profit for their families. A.L. Spiegel noted that farm wages ranged from 50 cents to $1 a day. Some farmers had just their families to help raise the livestock and manage the crops every day. So with the dust flying around, picking up the topsoil that most farmers had laid down for the year's harvest, some people had enough and called it quits. Families would sell their land, their tractors, most of their belongings, and pack up clothes in the car and head towards California. Why'd they head for California? There were large communal farms that farmers would work on the land for the day and be paid a certain wage for the day rather than risk growing food for the year and either making a profit or making a loss. The landowner that was willing to pay the farmers was the one that was making the risk with a profit or a loss. Speaking of relief, where was the federal government during the Dust Bowl? Don't worry, they were involved. The Department of Agriculture stepped in to take action against the Dust Bowl, the dust storms, and ensure that it would never happen again. The program that would take place would have the federal government buy up 140,000 square miles of land in the state of Colorado, New Mexico, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. The program was to buy the land and allow vegetation to grow back instead of having farmers continually farming on the land. The researcher assigned to survey the land discovered that 43% of the land that was purchased by the federal government was graded as seriously eroded, while the rest of the land was moderately eroded, which can be salvageable. The researcher further noted that more than 4 million acres of land should be returned to vegetation rather than farmland. Government did step in and take action. However, the damage was done for years before government stepped in. Remember, this program was enacted in 1937, not in 1932 when the dust storms had started. There were some people who had stayed behind. What was their life like during the Depression and the Dust Bowl? Well, for the most part, farmers had to keep farming and raising livestock it was their only source of income. Due to the drought and wind, their efforts often went for naught. Elroy Hoffman described the storms as terrible, as it had blown the seeds out of the ground. Of course, he didn't plant it very deep, and in the yard there were little alfalfa plants that had come up all over the place, and his wife had become very sick from the storm. Harvey Pickerel got a deal for a tractor. All he had to do was dig it out from the dust that had drifted over the tractor. The man who had sold Harvey the tractor said it was too dry to grow corn, therefore the tractor was useless to him. Herman Gordson said that the dust storm was like a black wall and that it would make chickens go to the hen house and sleep, even though it was only in the middle of the day. Life throughout the Dust Bowl was miserable for families that were caught in these storms. Families couldn't make money because their crops were unable to grow, and the livestock couldn't sustain themselves due to the dust and lack of food available. What did everybody learn from this environmental disaster? New technologies allowed farmers to control erosion of the soil by plowing deeper into the soil and using irrigation techniques. The federal government also took further action and decided it would pay farmers an annual fee to grow grasses instead of crops to decrease erosion. This continues to this day. Ultimately, farmers were told and paid to not farm the entire land output that they had bought with the bank. This was to prevent the farmers from falling into financial ruin and provide a safety source of income for all the farmers so that another Dust Bowl would never happen again. Ryan Putney noted that the Dust Bowl was able to occur due to the growth of cattle populations in the areas which led to overgrazing. Putney also noted that when prices of crops, notably wheat, had dropped significantly, farmers attempted to grow more and more food in an effort to pay back their debts. The overgrazing of cattle and overexpansion of wheat production were the primary factors that can be blamed on the farmers. But remember, drought and wind also led to the Dust Bowl occurring. Is it their fault, though? Farmers were desperate, as were most Americans during the Great Depression. Stanley Trimble pointed out that some farmers didn't even grow food and had to grow more cash crops, like cotton, to sell on the open market in an effort to buy their own food, rather than trying to grow their own food. In their defense, though, they had the land, why not utilize it? Their property gave you your food supply and your income to sustain your family. The Depression was an economic crisis that affected millions of people, many of whom had to sell off their assets to pay off debts and start over. A farmer and his family could take a gamble, though. They could try and grow their usual crop yield and sustain themselves for the year while keeping their land. Did abuse of the Great Plains lead to the Dust Bowl? Yes. However, were farmers prohibited from using the land to their own benefit? No. They used their land in their own vision and tried to make the best out of their lives. No one can be blamed for that simply because it is human nature. Furthermore, farmers learned from the experience. They learned to irrigate their crops more with reservoir systems and plow deeper into the land to avoid having wind pick up the dust and create new dust storms. Humans can be blamed for the creation of the dust storms, but now we must look back and say to ourselves, what would we do? What would we do for our families? How can I live comfortably in this free nation? What do I have to do to make the most out of my life?